Okay, so what was that? Let me spend just a second or two on the piece first. You might notice stylistically it has kind of an antiquated feel to it. It's a little bit old-fashioned. What my hope is that the tuning makes it interesting enough and alien enough that it gives a little bit of life to this otherwise old-fashioned style, which might be a little bit sentimental for some. But if my scheme of defamiliarization worked, then hopefully it kept your interest. I should add, this is a performable piece. This is the first of 3 movements. There's a whole score. It's for 2 separately tuned keyboards or pianos and a low voice or a low instrument. And if you'd like to play the piece, I can send you the score. I might make a more conventional video with the score that just sort of follows it, maybe when all 3 movements are ready. But moving on, let's talk about the visual side of things, which is probably what you're actually wondering about. So if you don't already know, this is a channel about just intonation, which is a tuning system built around whole number frequency ratios. You could say it's a tuning system that derives its pitch material from the harmonic series. That's kind of a really simple way, a little bit misleading, but it's good enough for now. And to speak really quickly about the notation, those little arrows on the sharps and the naturals and the flats, you might be familiar with the idea that the just major third is 14 cents flatter than the equal tempered major third. That's more or less what that's trying to convey. It's a little more complicated. It's actually a lot more complicated than that, but we don't have time. And so what the visuals are is a map of the piece in harmonic space with the addition of a new concept called harmonic luminance. So breaking this down, we have this grid or this graph or this lattice. And tuning lattices have a long history. They go all the way back to the mathematician Euler. Longtime followers will know that I'm a big fan of lattices, and I've made a lot in the past with this kind of structure. 3rd harmonic on the y-axis, 5th harmonic on the x-axis. And I love writing music with this kind of thing in mind because it adds an extra dimension to the spatial metaphors that are already inherent in the way we talk about music. So think about the way we talk about pitch going up and down. That's a metaphor. Pitch doesn't really go up and down. But we talk about it that way to make ourselves understood to each other and maybe even to help ourselves understand ourselves. And when I'm writing music, the idea of harmonic space helps me a lot more than most other types of music theory, because it gives a linguistic and a visual metaphor to something that is a huge concern for me, which is harmonic motion. And again, you notice the metaphor there, harmonic motion. But there's a problem with this scheme, and maybe you've already guessed what it is. What do we do about the octave, the 2nd harmonic, the 1st prime? Of course, we could plot the 2nd harmonic on a graph, just like the 3rd and 5th harmonic. We could make a 3-dimensional graph that incorporates 2, 3, and 5. But if you've tried this out ever, and I definitely have, to me, it confuses more than it clarifies. In fact, Clarence Barlow makes fun of this idea in his lecture that's collected in the Ratio book, and I don't want Clarence Barlow's ghost laughing at me. So to solve this problem, first we have to decide, what does the octave, what does the 2nd harmonic and its powers mean for this kind of music? Now, there are kind of 2 schools of thought for how to deal with the octave. And the first one, the mainstream one, is octave equivalence, which works great for most kinds of music, to be totally honest. But in all kinds of microtonal music, including just intonation, octave equivalence just doesn't cut it most of the time. In fact, there's a lot of microtonal musicians who will conceive of the octave as just another type of interval. It's not any different than the perfect fifth or the major third. And there are various schemes to sort of turn the octave into an interval with, for instance, the capability of harmonic motion, which is something that traditionally the octave is not felt to have. Usually when you're moving in octaves, you feel like you're in the same place. And the relationship with the octave that I've settled on is different from both of those. The octave isn't equivalent, but it's also not just another interval. So what I've settled on is this idea of coding the octaves in terms of brightness and darkness. And that's what I've added to this model of harmonic space. So harmonic luminance just means brightness and darkness represents how high or low we are. And that gives us a lot of things. It gives us a sense of timbre, and it also expresses on the lattice the voice leading of a piece. In other words, whether a note is in the bass or the treble. I mean, this is really important stuff that otherwise a lattice isn't able to express. Now, the piece we just listened to and watched, I recognize it's a little bit busy visually. So in the interest of really just demonstrating the concept without any frills, I have this much simpler piece in video, which I'm going to play for you now, which if you're still confused by the idea, hopefully it will help clear things up. So this has already been a lot of talking, and there's more that I could say about this piece. You might have some questions about some weird things that happen. For instance, this section right here, what's going on here, and I'll be happy to talk about that later. It's a neat trick I did there, but we don't have enough time right now, so until next time.